Welcome back to another episode of Life's Ambition Podcast. Today we are joined by someone on the Mount Rushmore of physical therapy. He's going to give his input on starting Athletico physical therapy. If you like the episode, please give the podcast a like or a 5-star rating depending on what platform you are listening to. Without further ado, Mark Kaufman. Mark, how we doing?
Drew, I'm doing great.
That's awesome to hear. How's the golf game going?
We're coming into the end of our season. I did play once last week. It wasn't terrific. My index is the lowest it's ever been. Last year it was in pretty good shape, and then a year ago, early October, I fell and broke some ribs and dislocated my shoulder. So had to go through a course of physical therapy myself that set me back 6 months. But I'm doing fine and avoided surgery and got back to playing in the spring, summer, and not still a painfully average player, but I enjoy the game.
I'm sorry to hear about the shoulder and ribs. That's really tough to hear. But hey, I mean, it's probably way better than what I could do. I shoot probably a 70 on the front nine, let alone a par three course. So I totally get that.
But you got to play and practice more. It's the only way to get better. It's just a
Yeah,
matter of getting out there.
when you bring up golf, it seems like it's such a social sport where you hear a lot of business professions like going into it that will do like work events there. So the hockey team that I played on, we actually had a hockey event at a golf course to just kind of raise money for the club. And so you hear a lot about these different experiences. And did you have a lot of that when you were owner at Athletico? You would work with a lot of doctors and bring them on the golf course and go from there?
Yeah, I think part of Athletico's story is certainly around relationship building, and on the professional level, that includes anything from going to courses, being in the offices, watching surgeries, social events like golf or dinners, or stopping by and meeting the doctors in their offices or whatever it took. And relationships evolve to friendships. I'd consider a number of physicians I stay in touch with even today, friends, and run into, and we get together socially with our spouses, and that's just I think it's part of anyone's professional life that you develop relationships that you want to keep closer. I think that's actually an important part of a young person like yourself to consider, that surrounding yourself with smart, good people, I think, just advances you and it advances your goals and what you're trying to do personally and professionally. So always interested in that. Golf provides a 4 hour plus time window that you get to spend with each other, and they do. The adage is true around you get to know someone's character pretty quickly on the golf course, how they handle a good shot, a bad shot, winning, losing, having fun, getting past a shot into the water and moving on, and being able to hit a second shot and blow up holes and great holes and bad rounds and good rounds. It's all part of it.
Oh, 100%. I think golf brings out the best in you, but also the worst in you at any point. I remember I was on a family trip in the Dominican, and this was for my grandparents' 50th, and I kept chipping the ball over the green. I think I did it maybe 8 times. I threw my club, my sand wedge too. It's still in the Dominican at this point. It's just gone. And I had a totally sidetrack question, but like when you have these relationships, like when did this all start? Like when did this idea of going to these events, building Athletico, when did it all start for you? Was it at school? Was it before then?
I think, out of school and working at the college level at Iowa and then Arizona and Tucson with the athletic teams, part of what you saw quickly is that relationships matter, and the team environment, not only being part of a team as a student athletic trainer where you actually felt part of the team, the success, the failures, the wins, the losses, etc., the good times and the bad times, like when injuries occur, is just part of the human experience. And I think you understood that, again, back to relationships, that you enjoy being around certain people and you learn from them, and you want to do more of that if you're a person like myself. So I saw those opportunities, or I saw those I took advantage of those opportunities, I guess. And I think back to the team physicians I worked with at Iowa and Arizona, and my mentors on the professional staff and coaches I got to work under or watch. Some
Mhm.
really great coaches, Hayden Fry at Iowa, for example, Lute Olson, the basketball coach at Arizona, for example. Did you see how they carried themselves, see how they managed adversity and managed a team? That probably contributed in the background noise to some of my good and bad management techniques and what I've learned from over the years. But with Athletico, you saw that people want to work with people they like, and if you can develop a relationship and you deliver on your end of the relationship, that might advance the relationship. Is at least the approach I took at it. I did not see how important relationships were to the success of a clinic when I opened Athletico in '91, but I quickly understood over time and that those relationships do matter. And so supporting good physicians, supporting good relationships for the business. I mean, we were one clinic and one employee. If we were going to be here 30, 33 years later, like we are now, you couldn't end and start relationships every day of the week to manage it to be or expect it to be sustainable. So I think that's just a natural process that occurred.
And that's crazy to think about. That it was one employee, and did you know that person from Arizona or Iowa was like, hey, do you want to come start this with me? Or
No, the one employee actually was the office coordinator, receptionist, if you will, that my wife helped find. Was working in a dermatological office, so she had medical office experience, which I barely did because I'd only worked in a outpatient clinic for a couple of years when I opened, and so she was the first official employee. I wasn't an official employee for about 3 years, as 2 to 3 years, as I didn't take a salary until we could afford a salary for me. So that's just the way we went after it. But I hired a receptionist, and in August of 1991, and with the clinic downtown in the Gold Coast area of Chicago on Clark Street, that's where it
yeah.
all began.
Well, that's crazy to think about that you didn't take a salary for a few years. And what kind of were the conversations with your wife? Was it like, I am very passionate about this. Like now that we have a receptionist, someone else that's part of it, like we have to do well. Like we gotta keep prospering, keep reaching out, try and build our clientele. I mean, what were those conversations like? Because not taking a salary, obviously, just working at a dermatology clinic, it can, I would almost say, like, if it's not going well, it can create a kind of divide. But if you're passionate about it, it's also tough at the same time. So what was that like?
Well, you're taking me back. I mean, Marianne, my wife, was obviously supportive. She saw some
Hmm.
frustration I was having at my first job. I was starting an outreach athletic training program, which was essential to our success with Athletico eventually. It wasn't being supported like I'd hoped it would by my people I was working with. And also, there's just a lot of miscommunication, confusion with the leadership of the people I was working with. And so we had these conversations around starting my own clinic. We had no idea we were going to ever open, or I was going to open a second clinic, let alone 900 locations like we have now. The plan was that I would open a clinic. I borrowed money from my parents. I borrowed money from her parents. She was working as a pharmaceutical rep, and that's where she met the office coordinator that we hired. She came in the evenings after work because I was there basically 6 in the morning until 9 at night every day, and
Wow.
she'd come in after her job had finished and answer phones and be around, and we'd close up the clinic at 9 o'clock at night and go home and start it again the next day. And it was a time where we didn't have children yet. We'd been married a couple years, but we had some freedom, I guess, in our schedules. But we were, and certainly I was all in on building that business and creating a sustainable model with one clinic, while she was a pharmaceutical rep that was basically paying our day-to-day expenses, and that's how we made it work. There weren't a lot of days off. There weren't a lot of vacations for a few years, but it's just the way it had to be if you're going to
Mhm.
be an entrepreneur. And The thing I always tell people is that when you do something like that, when you start a new position or you have some autonomy to build a team or perhaps start a business, there's a level of energy or a level of work that you don't even, a different gear that you don't even know you have until you don't have a choice. If that means getting up at 5 in the morning and going to bed at 11 at night and working every day and Saturdays and a lot of Sundays included, that's just the way it is. For me, at now 60 years old, to go back and do that again would be an interesting process. I'd like to say I could do it, but young energy still helps. So it's just interesting how it all works.
You bring up a very good point is the energy you get when you do something you're passionate about. So for me, with the podcasting experience, there's been several days when I've been up till 3 a.m. after the job I'm working, just editing episodes. And
Mm-hmm.
so I've been finding that my energy level is increased. It may take me a second to really start because I'll procrastinate. I feel like everyone can procrastinate at some points, but once I start, I am driven to finish, and I love doing this. I think it's awesome to hear about people's different stories. And you bring up how your athletic training position was essential for your first clinic at Athletico. What did you mean by that? Like the connections that you build
It
there.
was mainly because I would go out, imagine an outpatient physical therapy center. So in one, you depend on physician referrals, or now with direct access where a patient can walk on in our door. But imagine a new clinic that opens downtown Chicago and puts a shingle out with a physical therapy label. Back in 91 in particular, we didn't have direct access. So we were beholden, so to speak, to the physicians to send us patients. Well, I could drop off Athletico flyers or prescription pads at as many offices as I could, which I did, to make them
Hmm.
aware of the name, my name, where I was located, and that I was working there. But there was no reciprocal communication unless by chance they might have a patient walk in their door that day and say, "Hey, I live in the Gold Coast and I know if I need physical therapy, and do you know of anybody?" And then they say, "Yeah, this guy just dropped this off." So maybe by complete coincidence, they might remember that I am a physical therapist and I am in the Gold Coast, and that was part of the grandiose marketing scheme
Mm.
that I had. But the thing I underappreciated was I could take the athletes that I was working with, and that included during the week, I would cover a couple high schools that I had a relationship with. And
Hmm.
inevitably, if you have what we call exposures, the number of athletes that are being exposed to athletics or participating, they're going to get injured. You said you play hockey. I'm sure you've had your share of injuries.
Oh, yeah.
And then we all know the higher risk sports. So the schools asked, we had this relationship where I was covering the games, covering events, being available at the end of the school day for the athletes. And I'd come across athletes that needed care or needed a referral to get their shoulder looked at, their back looked at, their knee looked at. And then also on the weekends, I was working with a rugby club. I was covering this event called the Chicago Sport and Social Clubs Co-ed Football League, which was men and women participating together in flag football, which you can't imagine the number of injuries I saw there. So I ended up with literally athletes in my lap that needed referrals. So being an athletic trainer served me so well because I could evaluate the injury, tell the athlete what I thought they had, tell them what they needed to do about it. And that may include going to the emergency room. It may include
Hmm.
providing first aid and self-care. It may include being referred to a specialist like an orthopedic or primary care sports medicine specialist or whatever. And so then I was handling it. It would have been a lot easier today to do that with cell phones and the internet and email, but I didn't have that back then. So I was dependent on a clipboard and a telephone. And
Yeah.
I would set the athletes up with respective referrals, and I'd send them to the right doctors who wasn't wasting. I wasn't sending a knee injury to a hand doctor, shoulder injury to a spine doctor. I was sending them to the right specialist so they weren't wasting their time. And then the physicians were starting to recognize that this person on Clark Street under the moniker Athletico is sending me patients. And then when you start that reciprocal relationship with delivering patients to their front doorstep, Now they were sending patients back to us, and we took full advantage of that. And so we saw the advantage. We expanded the athletic training network, so to speak, over time to where I think we had the largest number of athletic trainers working under our umbrella of any business in the country. So we're very proud of that. I think we do it as good as anybody, better than most. We follow through. We do the work with detail, and it's been an important part of our growth story.
And when you talk about your story, how did how did you get the name?
I had a patient. Her husband was a Lutheran minister, so he would come in with her often. And I'm looking at our logo right now. I was telling him what I was going to do. I was going to open a clinic, and I was looking for a name that began with an A because that got you first in the phone book. I mean, things that you've probably never used in your life, a phone book. And
That's really smart though.
section on physical therapy. And so I wanted something that began with an A. And I wanted something, honestly, that I could replicate because the place I was working for my first job had 2 clinics, but they were named after the villages they were in. So it was like ABC physical therapy and DEF physical therapy. No one knew, even though the logos were kind of similar, that they were related, or not many knew. And it wasn't obvious. But like I said, this Lutheran minister, I told him I had this kind of European thing. I was thinking about le co sportif or athletique is, I think, the French word for athlete. Or so one day he brought in a list of names of words of foreign languages that meant athlete, and one of them was Greek, and my wife happens to be Greek. She'd like to take the credit for the name, but she can't have it because the name came from that person. And I had this word athleticos with an S, and I was looking at it one night, and I was laying it there, and I covered the S up with my hand when I was looking at the paper, and that became Athletico.
That is awesome. That is awesome. And when you first published the brand and you open up your first clinic, at what point was like, all right, when did your role switch from being the therapist to more the manager role, and then even to the business role of opening up your second clinic? When did you realize, oh, I'm starting to switch what I do?
So the management started after I started hiring employees, and I can easily list a bunch of mistakes that I made and just whatever, not delivering expectations, not cleaning up incomplete agreements, whatever you want to say. I mean, just things that I've learned over time. I've tried not to make the same mistakes over and over. But once Athletico had employees, then I became a manager of employees. So that changed and evolved over time with the number of employees. I treated patients until probably I started as a therapist in 89. I think I was still treating in some capacity until around 04, 05. By then we had probably 20, 30 clinics, somewhere there. And that wasn't easy. I always felt pulled in other directions, meaning when I was treating patients, I was getting pulled into management business decisions. When I was in management business decisions, I was missing the clinical environment because I enjoyed that. But at some point, I had to give it up. I eventually hired people to administrate and run the business. I was always CEO until 2019, but I was business leaders of respective finance, accounting, legal, whatever, human resources, marketing, et cetera, et cetera. Those departments and our corporate structure evolved over time as the need demanded it, which allowed me to do, I think, what I did best, which was hopefully managing people, growing the business, growing relationships, and setting a vision for what we were up to, and trying to not make too many mistakes.
And that's very interesting because when you first started, you said you were using phone books and calling people directly. Like you said, you wanted your name to be at the very beginning of the book when it came to physical therapy, so then people can be like, oh, they don't have to look very hard. And so for you, how did that change as you were growing? Like, did phone book become marketing sales, and the marketing sales became ads, and so on and so forth? Or how did the marketing of Athletico change, is what I'm really trying to say.
It changed dramatically with the internet, obviously, around late 90s, 2000. And you had web pages, and you had your websites, and you were sending out emails and sending out marketing messages, and then social media evolved. And so that all grew. But from 1991 to 2000, it was purely shoe leather. We were, all clinicians were expected to go on patient visits or visit doctors' offices to help grow the business or develop the relationships essential for the business. We were sponsoring different teams. Our first sponsorship of a professional team, for example, was the Chicago Fire in 1997. I think the Blackhawks were next around 2000.
Really, as a
And
second team? That's awesome.
yeah, so at one point we had all the professional teams in Chicago because 100% of our business was in the Illinois Chicagoland market.
Hmm.
Eventually, that evolved when we started growing in other states. We chose not to be partners with every team because of either the relationship itself or it just wasn't serving us. But went from, like I said, shoe leather of dropping our information off at physician offices, developing relationships, creating social events, visiting doctors on patient visits. And then that evolved to a full-fledged marketing department. We didn't have much of a sales department because, again, all the clinicians were our sales team. That has
Hmm.
changed in some respects where we do have a great group of salespeople. A number of them are former clinicians who understand and know the business of physical therapy and are out helping promote it because there's so many opportunities out there. You can't, with clinicians, we want our clinicians doing the thing they do best, and that's treating patients. So they have only a respective amount of time to go out to the field and develop those relationships. So we need a sales force at some point, and that's just how we look at it.
And I think that's very cool. And were you able to go see the Stanley Cup and so being a partner with a lot of these pro league teams? Were you able to see the World Series trophy when the Cubs won? Were you able to see like the Stanley Cup when the Blackhawks were on there? Huge. They were obviously the team of the decade and for the NHL. Were you able to check out a lot of those things?
I've loved sports. I was watching the games last night and college games Saturday, and I've been blessed to go to a number of events. I've been to a Super Bowl. I went down to Miami for a few days when the Bears. I came back before the game when the Bears went in '06.
That's
I got to
awesome.
go to a number of playoff and a few Stanley Cup matches during the Blackhawks run. I've had my hands all over the Stanley Cup through the hard work of our team members. Jeff Thomas, for example, who was an athletic trainer assistant during all those years and still is with the Blackhawks. So a lot of special memories and experiences that a kid from a small town in Iowa that never thought he would have the opportunity to enjoy that. Believe me, I've enjoyed every minute of it and created some fantastic memories.
And when you talk about athletic training, I should have asked this earlier, but I guess what is the difference between moving from the athletic training piece to the physical therapy piece? Because they coincide together, but they seem different. I'm assuming athletic training is more with the sports team, and you might refer the player to a physical therapist. Is that
Mhm.
kind of the difference between the two, or?
Yeah, I think simply said, athletic trainers are typically working on the care, prevention, and rehabilitation of athletic injuries. Now, the definition of athletic injuries has changed dramatically. When I started and became certified as an athletic trainer in 1986, we were working only with athletes, meaning in the purest sense of the word, high school athletes, college athletes, professional athletes. Eventually, that bled over to recreational athletes. And then you got to talk about the industrial athlete, though, because there's a lot of work injuries that are very similar, that require very similar procedures, surgery, rehab. So you have athletic trainers working in the industrial setting and other settings, military settings, et cetera, et cetera. And the same has been true with physical therapists. Physical therapists grew out of the, post World War II, as I understand it, where a lot of veterans were coming back from the wars with amputees and major injuries. And that's where the profession of physical therapy grew from. And in the probably 80s, it started to evolve. But in the 60s, 70s, physical therapists were primarily working with neurological patients, amputees, perhaps
Hmm.
some orthopedic things. But that was orthopedic surgery, outpatient orthopedic surgery didn't start really until the late 70s and 80s. And so that changed to where physical therapists began working with athletes, began working with other things. So it's crossed over in a lot of ways. And that's why the two fields, professions, I think make sense together. And then you throw in hand therapy. And a lot of times the hand therapists are OTs, occupational therapists. But a hand therapist can be a PT as well. But
Why is a hand therapist different than, let's just say, a athletic or physical therapist? How come it's a totally separate area for your hands?
it's an interesting question because hand therapists, there's a lot of specific procedures. The hand, as we know, is super complicated and super dynamic and super important, and you don't want to mess it up. And you need a specific surgery. So hand doctors are very specific about what they want and what they do to the patient to improve it.
Hmm.
And you probably get one chance at it, and you can't screw up. If you have a tendon repair in a hand, or an amputee gets his finger reattached or something like that, there's not a lot of wiggle room for mistakes. And so there's specific protocols and things that hand therapists, to become like a certified hand therapist, you got to go through advanced training for. And the doctors want therapists they can trust to put these patients in their hands, pardon the pun. So that's why I think that profession grew out a lot. Like I said, it grew out of occupational therapy. Occupational therapists help people get back to quality of life activities of daily living, putting on their shoes, socks, dressing themselves, eating, things like that. But eventually that evolved to specific hand diagnoses. So when you look at what Athletico does for our business, under our umbrella would include physical therapy, athletic training services, and hand therapy services. And when you look under physical therapy, it's mainly orthopedic. So the whole body, orthopedic, spine, shoulder, knee, hip, back, et cetera, et cetera. We do hand rehab. We have a group of athletic trainers going out and providing athletic training services. We have a group of physical therapists now, how physical therapy has grown, where they're providing services to women's health patients, mothers-to-be, mothers that postpartum have had their child and have some issues. We provide physical therapy to performing arts companies, dancers that are performing athletes, essentially, that need specific care. So that's the bulk of what Athletico does, but there's plenty of areas, silos of physical therapy, neuro, pediatric, acute care, burn therapy that we do not do, that are provided in hospitals, health centers, and other physical therapy locations.
And you bring up something that kind of relates back at home for me when you talk a lot about the different kind of sports and their injuries with the athletic trainers. For me, I feel like there was someone that was always injured on my hockey team, and it brings up to a different point of a lot of them would go see chiropractors for when they were hurt versus a physical therapist. Obviously, I was in a family who went to see physical therapy or therapists. And so I guess what is the difference even there between physical therapy, like OT, AT, and then chiropractic? I don't know why people would want to select one over the other.
I try, and I use the word try very seldomly, but I try to have a balanced opinion around chiropractors. I think there's some good chiropractors out there. I think that the chiropractic care has a place in the spectrum of care, particularly with injuries to the spine. And I have a lot of question marks on chiropractic care and the practice of chiropractic medicine. I think the biggest difference is that physical therapists, traditional medicine, we're focused on getting people better. I think prevention's now a big deal, and I know chiropractors are involved with that, but so you prevent health problems, prevent lifestyle, get involved with lifestyle issues that will help people live a longer and more healthy and more advanced or high level functioning life. But with the way I look at it, physical therapists, we get our hands on a patient, we want to get them better and get them independent and get them on their own, so to speak. Chiropractors seem to want to keep people in treatment for the rest of their lives. And I just don't agree with that. I think there's some question marks around the validity and the actual value of chiropractic care. And so when I see a chiropractor getting involved with things that I would say it's possibly the right move for a spine injury or spine rehab, or it's part of improving somebody's mobility, et cetera, that can be reasonable. When I see them trying to get involved with fertility or kidney function or other things that I've read about and seen chiropractors attempt to do, a lot of red flags and question marks come up there. So I encourage people to evaluate it. And if somebody comes to me, if I had a patient that was receiving care from me personally for, let's say, a low back injury, and I wasn't getting them better, or they weren't making improvement, and they wanted to try chiropractic care, I wouldn't have a problem with it. And that's the conscious decision of the patient. But I just think you got to go in with your eyes wide open.
Now, how many people have come to you when you were starting out? They're like, I was at a chiropractor, I just didn't feel better, and now I'm here.
Oh, it happens. It happens. I'm sure
Yeah.
there's people that weren't successful in physical therapy that end up with a chiropractor and feel like going in for an adjustment every week for the rest of their lives is something they want to do. And again, that's a conscious choice that if they choose to pay for it or have their medical provider wants to pay for it, uh, by all means. But it happens, and there's good experiences, bad experiences in healthcare, and it's just something that we at Athletico try to do things right, try to help people, try to get them back to their quality of life, and it's something that is certainly core to our mission and what we attempt to do. And we only learn from, I guess, mistakes and how the feedback from our patients, which was when I look at our outcomes and the feedback we receive, they're overwhelmingly positive. 98, 99% of our patients, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
99.6 would refer another patient to Athletico, and all those types of stats we look at. But people get into healthcare to help people and get them better. And sometimes we have to remind ourselves of that that's our goal. We want to get our hands on athletes as an athletic trainer. We want to get our hands on athletes and patients that need us as physical therapists. And the only way we do that is show up. And I think we got to take advantage of those opportunities and deliver our very best.
Is that the most rewarding aspect for you, is seeing someone kind of go through, let's say at the very beginning, they blew a quad tendon or something, and you help them out, they get surgery, you help them out with their rehab, and then they're back to normal? Is that probably the most, I guess, satisfying aspect
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
therapy world for yourself?
yeah. In the old days, so to speak, seeing an athlete return to form, getting back on the field or the pitch or the ice or what have you, the court, was always rewarding, and helping them get back faster than they anticipated, helping them through the physical and the psychological aspects of the injury and healing process is, I call it, label it fun. And you said rewarding, and I'd certainly agree with that. And the same is true working in the facilities, discharging a patient after 6 visits when they expected to be there for 6 weeks, or seeing an athlete or a patient go through their first surgery, which is, I've had a few surgeries, and it's I know what's coming, and I know what to expect, and I know everything about the process, and I was still worked up or nervous about it for myself. So I know what patients go through, and being empathetic and supporting them on the way, and seeing them get through it in good form is truly a rewarding experience, and why people get into the field.
Did you ever get stressed when you were working with these clients? Like, hey, I am trying to help them get through something. And did you ever get worried that maybe after X amount of weeks, they're at the same rehabilitation stage? They're maybe not doing their stretches or exercises that they need to be doing from home, so then it's only going to prolong it. How did you manage that stress? Or did you just have faith in I guess, the customer?
You have to have a certain level of confidence, and you have to be open to feedback, and you have to, if you're smart, like, tell young employees, young therapists, athletic trainers, and people in general, the smartest ones of you will leverage those around you when you don't know something. You can't possibly be an A student in every aspect of life, and so if there's areas you simply don't enjoy in your business or in your schoolwork, you might want to leverage some people that really enjoy that particular subject or that particular area, or hire somebody to help you along the way. And so if there was an athlete or a patient that I was struggling with, I would, if I was smart or I was on my game, I would quickly engage with the physician and just say, hey, what I'm doing is not working. And here's what we're doing. Here's what we've tried. And the patient's simply not progressing. And, considering or bringing other therapists to take a look at the patient that I was working with and having them take a look, and being willing or vulnerable or confident enough to do that. There's some therapists that probably wouldn't do that. So the quicker you recognize plateaus or lack of progress, the better you are in helping the patient to achieve their goals. But that's just part of, I think, professional growth and keeping the eye on the prize. The thing you always want to do, is get your patient better.
I guess I'll even take that question one step further. How did you manage the stress of running the business itself?
Sometimes well, sometimes not as well. I was lucky to have a supportive family and that extended family with my parents, my sister, who are all helpful in our process, a good network of friends, but most importantly, probably a great group of colleagues at Athletico to work with that were helping Athletico do what I wanted to do. And that was do things right, get better, grow, be sustainable, advance our relationships we needed to advance. And so there was a teamwork around that, that it was made it part of what still exists today, but different now. I'm no longer CEO, but it still exists today. And it's something I think we have to reflect on and get back to the key and core elements that help grow this business and making sure we're doing those things right. But it's all part of kind of the yin and yang of growing a business.
I guess take me through that. 2019, what made you decide up to that point is like, hey, I'm going to step back from being CEO?
It was a number of factors. Honestly, I'd going on 30 years of running the business, and I thought, well, we've grown from 0 to almost 500 locations by then, and still with room to grow. We've gone through a couple of sales of the business where we brought in financial partners to help us finance the growth of the organization. I thought in some ways that new leadership, a fresh start, new ideas would be good for the business. That was one. Two, I was 55 and thinking that can I do this for another 5 years or 10 years? Yes, I could. Did I want to? I didn't want to be. Our kids were out of the house and we were empty nesters. And I wanted, that was kind of a threshold that I wanted to make it to. I didn't want to be the kids are coming home from school and dad's laying on the couch. No, that would never happen anyhow, but I wasn't going to be that guy. And there was also some other matters. Personally, I don't make a big deal about it, but I'd sacrificed a lot of time with my kids and family and things personally that I wanted to do. And when you start looking at the second half of your life and what you have in front of you and what you've done and what you want to do, there were some things philanthropically I wanted to do. There were some things professionally. I wanted to see the business continue to grow. There were some things I'd like to have done, travel and see things, spend time with my parents who are still alive and see them more often, or go out and experience some things. And there was also, I unfortunately had a few people will happen as you go by that were no longer with us, and people that died at a lot younger age than me, that caused me to reflect and how is it that a young person, a young man at 38 or 9 with 4 kids passes away, or how does this woman that was a close friend of Marianne's and mine, that 3 kids and dies in her low 40s, and not to be too dramatic or melancholy, but it's just like you never know what's around the corner for you, and I just made a conscious decision that overall I was hopeful that it would be best for the business, and that proved not to be the case because we hired the wrong couple leaders, but we since have gotten a good person in the seat. So I got a smile on my face. So we have a good CEO now that I think is going to do a lot of good things for our business. But we went through a couple stutter steps that didn't work out for different reasons. And I'm excited now for the future, where it's been a little bit of a difficult stretch, just watching the business transition the last few years. And part of that was COVID, obviously, but part of that was some self-inflicted unnecessary harm to the business that we created. And we want to bounce back from that because our team and our patients deserve that.
And you bring up an interesting point that you had the CEO hat, so you sacrificed a lot of time with your kids and your wife and your parents. Was that always the give and take relationship kind of as the business grew? Or did you find that time just kind of slipped away kind of as things kept going?
Time, it slips away, and you'll see it accelerate over your life too, as I have. And The choices I made, I was lucky in the respect that I wasn't traveling. I was home every night. But night could have been 10 o'clock and getting up and leaving the house before anybody's up at 5, right? So
Hmm.
not to be, everybody does this. People that commit themselves to their work and their work environments and their jobs do it just as much or more than I did. But in reflection, honestly, I made a lot of choices that Athletico came first. If it was staying and doing a few more emails versus getting home, if it meant being asked to attend an event or a game or a meeting or anything that was perhaps going to help our business or help a relationship or help out a colleague or a manager, I generally would accept and do that, giving up being home when the kids got home or being home when the kids woke up. That just became a pattern that I'm not necessarily proud of. And you can't go back and change a lot of things, and we've all made mistakes. But I look back and I did a lot of that. I made up the story that I had to do it, that I had no choice, but I certainly had a choice. I made the choice consciously or subconsciously, and it's on me on the times I did that. And there was times like certainly wanted to, I had an option of going home and helping kids do math homework, or I had a chance to go to a Blackhawks game. Well, which sounds like more fun. So I could use Athletico in that respect to knowing that my wife's going to be at home or my kids can do their homework on their own because they're smart enough or what have you, that I made those decisions for whatever reasons that weren't always necessarily the right ones, but it's what I did. And
So would you
I can
tell
make,
yourself,
what's
would
that?
you tell that Iowa, Arizona self that was going through college still as an athletic trainer that you would do it all again?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that if I was looking back, I'm always one that's trying to perfect. I have that perfectionistic gene that I never achieved, but always trying to be more organized, always trying to get more done, always trying to maximize my day, always trying to get better, et cetera, et cetera. I think the thing that comes to mind is I would probably get back to setting boundaries, more boundaries, and working with my family and to be a better husband, father, son, brother, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think I was horrible. I certainly wasn't perfect, but it was what it was. It is what it is. And I'm sure others around Athletico, your dad included, we all had those moments. And so it's just part of our story.
Yeah, I know, like for my dad, he would work. He would get up early in the morning. He would get back when we were asleep. But after all those years, we still have a great relationship. And I know if he didn't do that, he wouldn't be at the position he is at today.
Hmm.
And so I'm thankful for that. And to be honest, I don't even remember most of the memories that I've had when I was a kid. No, I couldn't even tell you like any of them really. And so I value more now having the conversations with my dad now than I probably would just talking about random whatever back then. And
Yeah.
so for you, if that was ever a second guess or second thought in your experiences with not being there, I'm sure your kids value more the time now than it was then because I guarantee you, maybe they don't remember half of what it was like being a kid. I couldn't tell you. I remember certain things, but not a lot. And so
Yeah.
I don't know if that gives you more reassurance. And I did want to kind of like sidetrack a little bit. With all your experience, the hundreds of Athletico buildings that you've opened, where do you see this business growing to? Where do you see physical therapy as itself growing to? Because there's new techniques coming out. I know dry needling is a very big thing. I'm terrified of needles, so I stay away from it. But I know dry needling is a big thing that's coming out. Where do you see this going?
You know, and first, let me comment on your dad. Your dad has a hell of a motor. Your dad was an exceptional contributor to Athletico, great manager, great therapist, cared about his patients, cared about his team, developed a lot of relationships. And your dad was a great example of what made Athletico great. But as far as where this business is going and where the profession's going, my hope is Athletico continues to separate itself. There's a lot of good physical therapists out there. There's a lot of good companies. I want Athletico to be mentioned as one of the best. And I always challenged us and challenged the team. This, I want to be the best outpatient deliverer of physical therapy services in the country. I don't necessarily want to be the best or the biggest, but I want to be the best. And so
Hmm.
that means constantly seeking to improve and looking for the opportunities we have for improvement. And we have plenty. And if you take that approach, I think you're always trying to get better. I think that's a good way to go about it. I think physical therapy is going to continue to grow. Physical therapy is seen as conservative, non-invasive. That may help you with, despite dry needling, that you don't have invasive techniques, but we do have a few. So it's conservative, it's non-invasive, it's non-surgical, and it can bend the cost curve. Whereas if we get our hands on, like I mentioned earlier, direct access, we get our hands on a injury early, a back pain, an ankle sprain, etc., we can bend the cost curve pretty quickly by getting them in, recognizing what's going on, calming down the injury, getting them on a path to recovery, keeping their mobility, advancing their strength, stabilizing the injury, and educating the patient on preventing it in the future. And we can do
Hmm.
that in a matter of visits. It could be 2 visits, could be 6, could be 14, whatever it is. But then they avoid powerful prescription medications. They avoid unnecessary imaging costs like x-rays, MRIs that may not be necessary. And they certainly avoid invasive techniques like injections and surgeries. And not every patient is going to be a success story around that. There's patients that do need surgery. But if we give them a chance with physical therapy through a conservative course of care, through a few visits, we can prevent a lot of those unnecessary costs. So I see the field continuing to grow. There's areas, different techniques as you advance, as you had mentioned. There's different areas we're expanding out to. I look as, I'm into my 60s now and have an AARP card. That sounds strange to say that, but big area for physical therapists is balance, proprioception, fall prevention. We see what happens when an elderly person spirals downward health wise after a fall or a serious injury.
Yeah.
And so if we can keep people moving safely into their 60s, 70s, 80s, their twilight years, so to speak, and then they're going to live healthier lives, spending more quality time with their significant others, with their family members, with their grandkids. And I think that's a great opportunity for physical therapists.
And last question for you. What was the biggest piece of advice that you have received in regards to the physical therapy world, even just mentality wise? What is the biggest piece of advice?
Find a way to do what you love to do more and more and repeat. I think there was a book I read early on kind of about starting your own business that basically said, don't expect to be let's say you're opening a gardening business or a landscaping business or a physical therapy business or a intellectual property business or whatever it is. Why waste your time on the legal matters, the accounting matters, the real estate matters, perhaps the marketing matters? You need to be laser focused around developing and advancing that business. And for me, growing an outpatient physical therapy athletic training business, my time would have been wasted trying to understand the nuances of a real estate lease versus hiring real estate people to provide good counsel around that. My time would have been wasted understanding all the legal and compliance implications versus hiring legal lawyers and legal representatives to do that for us. My time would have been wasted to set up the finance and accounting structure for the business versus going out and generating the revenue that's going to pay for those things. So I think that's, you can distract yourself. You mentioned distracting yourself before you get into the zone of your work. And I think that's true. We can find ways to distract ourselves all day long. And it's just important that we stay as focused on the business and stay conscious in what we're trying to attend to or put our attention to as much as we can. Because we're going to distract ourselves, we're going to drift. That happens to everyone. But as soon as you
Mhm.
recognize that and get back to what you're trying to do, the better off you'll be, the more successful you'll be.
I think that's awesome. And Mark, I really do appreciate you being on the episode here today. And I thought your story was absolutely amazing. So I really do appreciate you being on.
Well, it's great to be with you, Drew. Look forward to seeing you down the road, perhaps at a hockey game.
Of course. All right. Thanks.
You bet.